Alrighty, everyone. We are here in week 3, day 1. We're going to go ahead and dive into today's lecture now. We're covering validations. So we've learned how to do full stack CRUD app, but before we keep building upon our knowledge there, we're going to have to learn how to validate certain form entries, right? So validation relates to form entries. So that's where we receive our request for our request response cycle. So we're getting information in our form, and we need to make sure that information is valid. So we need to create what's called validations. All right, let me give us a practical example here. Here I am in Facebook's homepage. All right, I'm in the incognito mode, so I'm here at a fresh login as if I were visiting for the first time. So I go here and I want to create a new account. Okay, I want to create a new account. I haven't created this yet, but let's just see. Maybe I could hack into someone else's account, just maybe just by chance. I'm going to say email.com 1234, and then I'll say um, password 1. Maybe there's some user with this login information. So if I click login, what does Facebook do? It just lags out. Well, that's one form of validation, but that's not the way we're teaching today. Let's go ahead and go into create account. This is not the best example of what I was trying to just show. Let's go to create account. All right. I'm going to now make a new account. It was taking too long to find that one. So let me just refresh here because it's bugging out. I'm going to create a new account, and I'm just going to put in random information here. I'm just smashing my keyboard, my hand on my keyboard. I'm clicking random dates. And if I click sign up, it says, actually, no, you didn't do that correctly. You need to look at several things here. And it highlights it, as you can see here. It highlights this, wrong birthday info. And it says, look at this here. You didn't fill this out either. So the form is telling me you didn't complete it right. You didn't enter in the information correctly to make a valid entry for our form. So before we even get to submitting information, putting information in our database from our app, we need to make sure that the information is correct. We need to make sure that we're not just getting bad data here. And if a user is going to be created, if they're not doing it maliciously, we want to make sure that they are doing it validly, so that they're doing it correctly. So let's see what this is telling us. It's saying enter a valid phone number or email address. Okay, so if I say 1234, is that a valid phone number? If I say sign up, it still tells me no, it's not a valid phone number. So it knows what a valid phone number would be, have to be a certain amount of digits. What if I do a certain email address? If I say 1234 at 1234.com, if I sign up, now it's telling me, hold on a second. I've asked you to re-enter your email address whenever you entered the first one. So I'm not going to let you continue until you re-enter that and validate that for me. Here, you need to re-enter in your email address. Okay, so what if I just copy it here? Actually, I'm not going to copy it. I'm going to do a slight variation. I'm going to say 123 at 1234.com. So you can see there is a difference between that digit 4. So let's see what happens if I sign up now. Oh, it tells me actually your emails don't match, so you cannot continue. So you shall not pass, like Gandalf. So let's go ahead and then put in that 4. Let's make it equivalent, sign up. And then it goes on to the next field that I didn't enter in correctly. Okay, so I enter my age. What if I put in like a high number? Okay, and then let's continue. And it's saying, hold on a second, that's not your age. You still can't enter your age as 700. That doesn't exist. All right, let's see. How old can a Facebook user be? Can I be 140? Nope, it doesn't believe that I'm 140. What about 120? I'm the oldest Facebook user. It doesn't believe 120-year-olds can use it. All right, what about 100-year-old? Can 100 years old be a valid age? Okay, you can be a 100-year-old Facebook user, apparently. And there's a limit to how old they will believe you to be a user. What about 110? 110, you can still pass. All right. Good to know. All right. You guys, if you haven't joined Facebook by 110 years old, you can still do it by then. There's no restriction there. Now it's telling me out of these radio options, right? It says you have to choose a gender. All right. So, okay, I'll click one. And will this pass as a valid user? Now, if I click sign up, it's actually going to go through. It says no one else will see your birthday. You can change this on your own profile later. So because it's giving me this notification, it's telling me you're about to go through. So just FYI, no one's going to see your birthday. So you can change this later. I'm going to press cancel because I don't want to actually create this user for Facebook that has this information. But I would have to actually have a valid email address to make this account active and so on and so forth. But you saw here that you can't just enter in any age for the age here. It's going to validate at a certain point. I wonder if 115 is going to be allowed. No, 115, you can't. It's 120. They say we're not going to let you have an account the last year of your life. So, all right. This is a form and it has proper validation, as you can see. It's not going to let you enter in an email that's different from the first entry. It's not going to let you pass without giving us a first name. So you need to have valid form information. And this is what we're going to be going over today in our lecture. Okay, we're going to be creating our form to have validation so that we're getting valid entries, especially for creating a user login and registration, just like we see here. So this user login and registration is what we'll be creating on our own page. It's not going to be as pretty or fancy as this. Again, you can add styling whenever you have time on your own time. And so let's look at the example that I have to see what we're going to be building. Okay, let me go ahead and start my app here. And I'm going to go to the version I have built. Okay, it's up and running. And this is what we're going to be building today. We need to make our own user login and registration page. So what this means is when let me go make this a little smaller so we can see. Okay, so when I click login without putting in proper information, it should tell me you have an invalid email or password. All right, so here is my error message, as you can see, invalid email or password. And we can change that to be red if we'd like. But what's most important is getting the right message to show up for the right validation, right? For the right form validation, we need the right message to pop up. So let's look at our register now. So we know that we can't just barge in through the email without putting a valid form entry. All right, so what if I then enter in just a random text like this, ASDF? It's going to tell me, please enter a valid user address. So we have our form validation here. So if I say right here, and I give a valid email now, if I give a random password that I know is not going to be a good password, email, invalid email or password. So it tells me here actually, nope, you got that incorrect. That's not correct. Invalid email or password. Okay, so I can't go through my login yet. Let's register a new user. Okay, so I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna hit ASDF for each form because I shouldn't be able to get through just smashing my keyboard, right? And actually, it does tell me I have certain things wrong. I say here, actually, your password is too short. You need at least one digit in your password. It does not contain any uppercase letters, which is a requirement, and your passwords don't match either. Okay. All right. So we have a list of validations, and we're going to go over each one that we would need, right? For an empty form, for a password not matching. And so let's go ahead and dive into today's lecture. There's a lot validation for us to cover. And so let's look at the platform for a second to show you where I'm getting today's content from. I'm not going to be following this platform exactly. I have my own app that I want to create. It's very similar to what we saw here. Okay. I'm going to be creating my own app, but it's going to have validation very similar to this. So if in case you need to look over what some validation examples look like, the proper syntax, what they would look like inside a method call, here's an example here. And we're going to be going over all the different tools that we used in order to make our validation work as such, right? So how do we make a message pop up when it's only validation related to the registration, right? How do we make the message pop up? And how does it pop up only here and not in our login information? Or how does our login information show a validation message only for when we have wrong validation, wrong entries in our login field? So there's lots of things to cover here. So let's go over a checklist to go over what we're going to be going over in which order. Okay. So the first thing I want us to note, and I'm going to be iterating over this here and there over the lesson, is the use of what's called a static method to validate. Okay, so let's look at the platform again. I'm going to go to the platform here. And what do we see here? Static method. What's the type of method that we've been using so far when creating a function? What's the decorator usually say at whenever we create a method so far? I'm checking the messages. Class method. Good job, Brooks. All right, so what we want to know is that static methods don't receive self or the class passed into the parameters. We don't even need to receive a parameter to represent our burger. We're not looking at the class attributes. We're not looking at class methods. We're not looking at the self or the instance of the class. So what a static method does is that they're methods that belong to the class's namespace, but don't have access to self or class. So then, they cannot modify either the instance or the state, right? So the instance that's created by the class, we are not affecting that. All that this function does is receive data from our form, okay? This is receiving a burger or it's receiving form data in order to receive that information. So it's checking the form. And then it checks the entries in the form. So see here, burger at name. If it's less than 3, then you're going to flash here this message. And as you can see, we have some things to import. So let's go over how to make something like this. Okay. And so in order to do this, I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to do a project from scratch. And so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go into my desktop. All right. And I'm going to create a login and registration here. So mkdir login and registration. Okay. I'm going to go in there. And I'm going to open up VS Code here. And here I am. So in this place, I'm going to start building my project. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay. Okay. So let me take a look here. I have an empty folder, and so I'm going to start creating the necessary folders and files in here to get myself up and running. And then I'm going to start, and then I'm going to create a database. Okay, so let's say pip. So, all right, actually, I want to make sure that you guys remembered from last Friday here. Guide me here, and then let's create this app real quick. What's some steps here that I need to do some installations, some environment stuff? Where am I at this point in creating my app? What do I need to do? Pip install Flask, and then pi my SQL. So far, so good. Awesome. Okay. And the next thing I want to do is pip env. Actually, did I install my files correctly? Pip.lock and pip file. Is that in there? Should I be seeing that before I run pip env shell? I think we did something wrong here. I think it should be like this, right? Pip env install Flask. Yes.
Oh, if that works, then never mind. But I always have to do PyMySQL first and then Flask when I'm doing my install statement, but I'm not sure if that matters.
Are you working on Mac, PC?
Mac, yeah, same thing.
Okay.
There we go.
So if it works for me, I know then it's not a Mac issue, but it could be maybe depending on our versions, if that's something. We'll look into that later if you want to drop by. Okay, so here is a login and registration. I have the pip file and the pip.lock. So now I want to then start creating my server.py. So touch server.py. And I have my server now. And so the next step is to create my Flask app. So mkdir Flask app. Okay, let's go in there. Let's open it up so we can see it being built. And then we'll say, let's make the config folder. Let's go in there. Command not found. MK typo. mkdir. Okay, and then in my config folder, I say my SQL connection.py. Okay, and let's get out of here. Let's go create a controller. Okay, and then inside here, inside my controller, I'm gonna say touch, and I like the way that Kyle created his file. He called it a excuse me, user controller. That way we have a little bit better grasp of what this file is when we reference it. Okay, so we have our user controller. Let's come out of here. And then I'm going to say make a models folder. So actually, I need to be in my Flask app. I went too far out. Flask app. And then I say make their models. Let's go into the models. And then touch user model.py. Okay, so I have my config, I have my controller. Then I actually got my controller file outside of my controller, so I'm just going to drag it in here using VS Code. So there it is. Now I have it in the right spot. User controllers in the controller, user models in the model, config here. And one last thing I'm missing, which is my templates folder. So I'm going to say, come out of here and say mkdir static no, templates, sorry, templates. And here I'm going to create my index.html. So here we are. Okay, so I have a basic template where I can get started now. And let's start filling in the files, the necessary files, and then we'll go ahead and create our database. Okay, so the boilerplate for the MySQL connection.py is always going to be the same as we recall. So let's go ahead and slap that in there and make sure my password is set. So it is, has my correct password. So then this file, check, we're done here. Now from here, I usually like to take a look at my, one more critical thing I definitely missed within this folder schema here that I should be creating. What is it? Oh, here it is, Austin. Dunder init. So good catch. Let's go ahead and go in there and say, in my Flask app, let's touch init underscore dot py. Is it there? There it is. It's in my templates folder. So let's just drag it to the right folder level. Ooh, did it not drag? Stubborn. Let's just delete it.
It was in the right file. Forward.
It is? Oh, I see. I see. It's just that my index.html is in the wrong space. So now that that's in the right space, I can see that properly. So let's close all my folders. I have my dunder.py within Flask app. So this is what's connecting everything in my Flask app folder through this dunder.init.py. This is what connects to my server. Okay. So there's a couple things that we're going to need in our dunder.init.py. I'm going to take in the typical things that we put in here. So we're going to import Flask. We're going to give the name of the app, and we're going to have a secret key for session. And one more thing I want to add in here that we haven't fully introduced yet, but now we can, which is I'm going to reference my database. And now this is not the name of the database. So we're going to have to put a name here. So name of database here. So we're going to have to call our database something. And anytime we make a call to the database, we can just pass in DB and not have to put in that unique database name every single time. Okay, so once we find the name of our database, we'll go ahead and replace that there. Okay. So replace the name once a is created. Okay. And now let's look at our server.py. And so I'm going to import my Flask app. So I'm going to say from Flask app, import app, right? So we're importing this now, which is going to give us access to the whole app. All right. So now we have access to our app from our server. We need this line in order to run the app at all. And I'm going to import, well, I don't think I need access to my controllers just yet, but I do, because I need a basic route that will return, that will direct me to my index.html. So I need when I start my server to connect to my controller. So let me go ahead and connect to my controller. I'm going to say from Flask app.controllers. Controllers import user controller. There we are. So now I have access to my controller from my server.py. This user controller then is where I'm going to need to do some routing. Okay. Now, before I do that, let's do some recap on Friday's lesson. Okay, this should be some easy, quick recap. Let's talk about our three friends in the MVC model. Here is three characters. They all have the t-shirt with the MVC on it. Okay, now let's talk about which each character does here. So the star of our show, he's in the middle. He's number C, or letter C, not number C. And what does he stand for? He stands for controller, right? What does the controller do? Takes requests. Okay, he controls the flow of data and communication. So our first point of contact when we enter our app is through our controller. This is why we're building it first. He's our traffic director. All right, in our analogy of a Subway deli or a grocery deli, he receives the requests for let's say I want a pastrami sandwich. So he receives it, he directs traffic, he tells the model what to do, and then he gives information to the view. So then what is now this guy here? Who is Mr. M? He's the model, right? And why do we call him the model? All right, maybe it's not for his good looks, so we can cross that out. So being rude here just to be funny. What is the model do? He interacts closely with the DB. Yes, he does. He interacts closely with the DB. And why does he do that? Well, what about him makes him the communicator with the DB? What about him gives him that role? But let's talk about, he has the class methods. Yes, he handles the class methods. So that's why he's called the model. He's like he's the class hero. Okay? He has the attributes and the method for each class, and the methods are functions, right? They do stuff. So that part of him that does stuff with the database. He interacts with the database. He submits information. He pulls information from the database. And once he has it, he can tell the controller, hey, I got what you asked for. Here it is. Let me just give it back to you. And what does the controller do from there? The controller says, oh, okay, so you got that information, you submitted it like I asked. Okay. Now that this is almost pretty much done, I have all the information I needed. And so we get to our last character, right? Who then is Mr. V? By the way, Mr. V used to be my teacher name when I taught PE. Mr. V. All right, anyway, Mr. V. What is he again? He is the view, right? And what is the view do? We're almost there. We're almost done with our analogy here. So what? HTML. Yes. It packages our view, all the information that we got from either our route of our controller, our model, and then it says, okay, we're going to render template this HTML. And so this is just the front end, the final packaged product. But we do need some logic in order to make this work. And so we use Jinja. Okay, we use the Jinja logic in order to parse through the data that our model gave to our controller. So we first enter our controller decides whether or not it needs to talk to the model. In case yes, the model goes and gets that information or submits that information. And once that's handled, our controller hands it off to our view, which then packages it up nicely for our user and then gives that information out. So here is our model view and controller and our 3 characters, our 3 amigos. Okay, so now that we did a little recap, let's go ahead and continue building. I just wanted to make sure that we're still remembering that clearly. And so we have our controller. So let's go ahead and use our controller as what we said its purpose was, as to be a traffic director. All right, so let's import some stuff here before we get started. We need to well, we need to import Flask here. Let's see. From Flask. Import Flask, render template. Template. And as well as request and redirect. These are the imports we need for now. And I think this is all we need. I don't think anything's going to break at this point. Let's go ahead and make the app route go to our home, and we'll say def index, our index page. We're going to return render template, and we're going to say index.html. So I think this should work. Once we get this to view our index.html, then we've created a basic boilerplate for our app, right? So let's make a hello world. We've created the basic boilerplate that should be working to then start building upon. So let's go ahead and see if we can get this up and running. I'm going to clear here so I have a better view. Okay, so now that I'm here, let's go ahead and activate our pip files. So we're going to say pip env shell. How far will this get us? All right, so we have our environment up and running. We know that because we have the name of it right here. Where is my, oops, no, I don't want to print. Here we are. So here, environment's up and running. So let's go ahead and get it started. Python 3 server.py. Okay, so here we have our first error. So let's take a look. What did I do wrong? App.route, and it takes us to a slash. Is there a typo there? From Flask app.controllers import user controller. Okay, and then it says line 6. I have this app.route error here. Okay, so let's take a look. What did I get wrong there? Line 6, app.route. Did I not indent this where I was supposed to? What's the issue here? It says here's the beginning of my error here. It says file user. Okay, on line 2. Did it not get my controller? So let's take a look at that. Let's see that we imported our controller correctly. From Flask app.controllers. Did we spell that? CONTROLLERS. Yes. Import user controller. Okay, that looks accurate to me. Import your app instance, I think. Oh, okay. Let me see here. What from Flask app, import app. This here should, in the controller, let's see here. Let me check my controller one more time. So my controller I have here. Oh, thank you. All right. So from Flask app. So what our controller needs that I forgot to include is access to the whole entire Flask app module. So let's go ahead and import that from Flask app. Import app. And let me check the other comments here. Check init to make sure we declare the var app, the app var correctly. Okay, let's check that again. I think our init should be fine. I think our controller needed access to the app as well. So let me go ahead and rerun this. Oh, okay. 8,000 is already in use. It's because I showed you guys the example. So let me go ahead and cancel this one here. So when you see this error, port 8,000 is used already. Make sure that you don't have another terminal running that's on that port. Okay, so this is why I got that error. I had to close out my other terminal that had the other app running. So now I should be able to go. Let's see this in view. Don't need this anymore. Hello world. Okay, so now that we have here, we have our starting point. I wanted us to recall how to do this because we're going to have to do this step over and over again until we have our checklist ingrained in our mind. Okay. How much time did it take me to do all that? It took me a good while. And what I am wanting you guys to know through doing it over again is to get a sense of creating a checklist for yourself in your mind and getting that basic initial starting point from where you can work. Once you can see Hello World from this MVC framework, then you can start building more routes in your controller. You can start building models and start interacting with your database, start connecting your database. And the other thing I want us to know is because it took so long, man, I didn't really need to know anything specific about my app in order to make this work, right? I didn't need to know, anything at all other than we need a user. And we can assume that we would need a user in most apps. So we can use a user controller as a starting point, change it if we need it. But what this does is it saves us a bunch of time if we create it before starting the test, right? So if we get to this step where we have created all this before the test, imagine how much time we would have saved on the test itself. So let's get in the habit of doing this before starting projects, before starting new assignments, and especially before starting our test. We should have all this time shaved off of our exam if we would have created our folders and files correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a poll to see how well we understand how I got to this point, and then we go ahead and start building validation from here. Austin asks, could we just make a template and copy and paste the files once we do it? Well, there are certain things that we need to do when copying and pasting, and also to keep in mind. For one, when we do our pip file installations, they need to be local to that environment within that certain folder. So you have to still do the installation local to that folder. And two, you have to have the most basic template, as you can see here, because I haven't yet connected a database, but if I were to, and then use this as a copy and paste, then I'd have to change my database as well. And you have to be aware of that. Okay, so far in my config or in my init.py, I have something to hold the database name once I have it, and then I'll reference DB instead of the name of the database, all the rest of my app. Okay, so let's go ahead and start working with the database now. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot better numbers on the poll that I'm seeing last week. So I'm liking that you guys are making progress, and I want to share that with you guys. So take a look at your numbers here. You're doing better. Now let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to pull up MySQL Workbench because I want to create a database at this point. Okay, so at this point, I am going to create a database. And the reason I need to create a database, again, is because I'm creating an app with a user login and registration. So let's go ahead and create a table, or let's create an ERD here for ourselves. And at a certain point, you can start reusing them, but I'm not going to reuse it because I want to do some practice here. Let's create our database name. I'm going to say login, dojo, login, and registration. Cool. Now I have my schema name. Let's go ahead and add a diagram. So I have my login and registration. I'm going to add a table. And this is going to be my users table. All right, let's add an ID. And what else do I need here? Let's create one similar to the one I had created in my example. So let's create a first name, last name, email. And email is still varchar, right? Because we're taking in possibly letters and numbers, and nowadays some names have numbers in them. Well, that's not the point of what we're talking about. Let's continue. We're gonna make a password. I feel like names should be only characters, no numbers, right? Anyone know any people or anybody with a number in their name? Not to pick on them, but let's continue. Anyways, I'm getting distracted. Created at, and this is going to be a date time, and updated at date time as well. Also, one more thing I want us to get in the habit of doing is whenever we see a password, we want to increase the limit to 255. And we're going to get into this today of why we're increasing the limit to 255. Let's just know that we have to do this, and I'll explain this later. Okay, so note to self. Varchar always has to be 255 when creating a password. All right, so let's go ahead and add a timestamp. Should we have a username? Email is our username. Email is our username. So yeah, cool. And so then we add our timestamps, current timestamp, and then we update on update. So anything here that we're missing, I think this looks pretty clean. So far, so good. All right, I'm getting a nod from Vincent, so let's continue. And then let's forward engineer it. Continue. Let's drop the objects. Continue. Password. All right. Are we going to get all success? Yes. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and go into our local instance. I already have it open, so you would have to click here to open it. Mine's already open. So what I'll have to do is refresh this, and I'm looking for Dojo login and registration. So it should be around here. There it is. Dojo login and registration. So here is our first users table. If I select all from here, then we are in. Okay, and there's no data here. And we don't need to seed it for this project. We actually are okay for now. So let's go ahead and leave this. But what we need now is the name of our database. This here is the key to connecting our database to our app. And I said that we would be connecting it in our dunder init.py so that we don't have to make reference to it every single time we make a database call. We're just going to refer to our database as DB. So let's go ahead and enter the name. I'm going to say Dojo login and registration. Okay, so now we have our database connected. It's now connected. We need to get to a point where we're able to start creating users, right? Because that's what we have in our database. But again, what we're covering today is validation. So now that we've hooked up our database, I want to do one more poll before we continue to the meat and potatoes of our lesson. How well do we understand how to create and link our database now? Okay, awesome. Okay, so what I want to do now is, now that I've created a database with a table that has this information, ID, first name, last name, email, password, created, updated app. Let's start our user model, and let's base it off of the table data that we would see here. Okay, so let's fill this out, and then we'll come back to it. Does the database need to be in quotations? The database is in quotations. Here it is, in quotations here.
Okay, I
Yes.
was just wondering if it has to be in quotations or if it doesn't need to be.
Yes, it does, because it has to be a string in order to receive that name. It has to be something.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Good questions. Let's continue. Now, where were we? We said we wanted to create a model. Let's create a quick model here, and let's have it represent the values in our table here. So let's go ahead and say class user, and let's say in our user class, we're going to have to create a constructor so that when we have data, we can create an instance of this class. So our constructor has to take in self, and then the data that it would receive in order to create an instance of this class. All right, so what do we have here? Our ID is our first value, so we say self.id equals data at ID. And I wanted just a quick recap. What's the way that we send our ID when we are sending it in a form? What we did something in particular with the ID that we didn't do with the other form data, which was what? Had to be input type hidden. Had to be hidden input, because we're passing in the ID from our object that shows us that specific ID of that user, but usually we're going to have it as a hidden input. So just FYI, in case you have forgotten that part, we're going to go back to that in a second. So let's go ahead and add the first name, last name, data at first name, self dot last name equals data at last name. Okay, self dot email. If you guys see a typo, by the way, please correct me before I debug later on down the lecture. So, all right, so this is going to take in our password, and then self dot created at is going to receive our created at, and then we're going to get updated at as well. Updated at. Cool. Okay. So now we're at the point where we have a user model. We need to do some imports in order to make this accessible. Let's go ahead and do an import of our connection to MySQL and our connection to our database. So we're going to say from Flask. Can you please explain the subscript for the self dot? Everything is being fetched from data argument. Yes, so whenever we use this user class method, we're taking the data from the row of the table, because one row will have all this information: ID, first name, last name, email, password. We're taking that information, we're putting it into data whenever we have a class method that we'll start doing this with. I haven't built the method yet, but the method would, for example, if it were read all, okay, if it were read all, then it would read every row and stick every row into this class here through data, because we receive it as a list of objects. So it would take that object, that row data from that object, and stick it into this class method so that we receive an instance of a class. And that instance of the class that's created through that object, we are then parsing through several objects or instances of this class here to get our data. So we'll continue to build it. It's kind of hard to answer that question right now, Oriel, until we fully build it. Before we start building methods, though, to start inputting data in our database, before we start creating users, we need to focus on validating the information before we start inputting that into our database. So let's look at our checklist for today. All right. We are going to start to build our first static method. Okay. We're going to start building our first static method. And within our static methods, we're going to start building if statements. And these if statements are going to check if our entries are valid, right? So this is where we start creating a validation at this point. Now, in order to check if our entries are valid, we need to have entries at all. Okay, we need to have entries at all. So let's go ahead and take a look at our index.html. And here is where we're going to have to create our form, right? So let's go ahead and start creating a form in our index. And this form is going to send data to our controller. Our controller then is going to say, oh, okay, I see you receive this data. Before you submit this data to the database, I want you to go to the user model. And once you go through that user model, I want you to validate in here. So let's go ahead and write some comments, okay? So we need to create a method that will save a user. And this method to create a user is going to, we're going to also need to, so sorry, not create a method. I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is going to have to be in our models here. So this, we're going to have a route that creates a user. Sorry, create a route that creates a user. And then we're going to also need to validate that data that we receive. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on our form. Let's go ahead and go to our index.html. Okay, now let's recall how to make a form that will properly send data to our backend, right? So this is our waiter or waitress, and the way that it can receive that order from the customer and send it to our cook in the back. So how do we get started here? What's the tag that we need? What's the HTML element or tag that we need? Form tag, there we go. Let's go then create it form. And what goes here in the action? A
The
route.
route you are going to?
Yes, the route. So what this route is going to have to go to is a route that I have yet created, but this is going to have to post the user. So I'm going to call this users registration, and we're going to have to build this route in just a bit. So let me go ahead and have that here. This is where I would be creating this, but let's come back to that in just a minute. So then what's the next piece of the puzzle that we need in order to make this form properly post the information? Okay, this is something where we can get tripped up here in our exam.
Method post.
Yes, and what is specific about it that we have to be aware of that's different from our server.py? Or our, sorry, not server.py, but our py file, is the way that we spell it. Instead of methods, it's singular, method post, as we see here. Okay, so just be aware of the typing. It's very specific here. All right, and then one more thing we need in order to send this data to the back, which is what? All forms have a what?
Submit button.
Yes. Button. And then we're going to say submit. Okay, and this is going to be for our registration. So maybe we should make this to be register. All right, now I want to check my check my code before I continue. All right, and so here's my form. It doesn't have anything to enter, but it has a button that I can click register. All right, so let's go ahead and create some inputs in the form now. All right, so what do we have as far as what we need to input? We have a first name, last name, email, password. So 4 inputs. Okay, so let's say input times 4. Okay, now we got something here. So actually that didn't work out as nicely as I want. I just want 1 input. How about that? 1 input. We'll work one at a time. Got a little ahead of myself. All right, so this one, input type text. What this is going to be is for the first name. All right, so let's go ahead and say first name. So we have little clear dividers here. So input type text, and then we're going to say name type text in our input. So we say name equals first name. Yeah, that's what I want. First name. Right, so see that it's not broken yet. There's my first input, and I want my button here to be a little bit below. I'm just going to cheat by putting a couple BR tags. All right, so now we have our first name. We need a label so we know what we're entering here. So we're going to say for the first name, and it should say first name. All right, so there is my first entry. Okay, and I am just going to copy this one more time here, and then go ahead and change it to be the last name. So I'll just do a little editing here. I'll just change these to last. Okay, let's see the last name. Last name is there, and I want some spacing. And I know we said not to use these in WebFun, but we're not doing WebFun. We're just creating just the basic look. We'll do the official styling later. All right, so first name, last name, then we had 2 more. We wanted to enter email and password, so let's go ahead and take it. Right, so email, and then we'll take this here. Email. Email. Okay, all good. And let's continue. Last entry is for password, correct? So our password, I like to, before I make the password input type password, I like to, how come it didn't put that spacing in? There we are. Okay, we need to, I prefer to make it input type text so that we can do some, have an easier time creating this validation. And then once we know it's working correctly, we'll change it to input type password so that it blocks, so it creates the little dots when we enter in here instead of showing the letters. So we'll just make it a regular input type until we make it an official password. So we'll go ahead, take this email entry, and then let's make a password entry. Password. Password. Okay, so there we are. Now, when we're creating a user for the first time, when we're registering a user, we want the user to be able to confirm that they entered the right password, because if they possibly entered a password that they had a typo on, that they weren't aware that they entered incorrectly, we want to help them so they're not frustrated. So let's create another entry called confirm password. So let's go ahead and take this password here. And this is gonna act a lot like, I already deleted it, but the confirm password in our Facebook example. Okay, so let's go ahead and call this one password confirmation and say confirm password. And the name here is password confirmation. There we go. Okay, so then password and our password confirmation. So far, so good. This is all I need to get started. So now we have our form input to go ahead and access this route. All right. So now that we want to access this route, let's go ahead and create a simple route to receive it, although we still need to validate. Okay, so we're just still creating this CRUD functionality where we can receive this data. Let's go ahead and make this go somewhere. So let's go to our controllers, and we know it's called users registration. So I'm going to pull my controller to the right here as I work on it so that I don't make a typo. Okay. So let's go ahead and create our route. App.route. Let's take in that route users registration. And here is where we say methods with the S and post all caps. Methods post. Okay. And then let's go ahead and say, let's make our function def registration. Okay, so here's our function. It's going to register. And what this does is it registers our app, right? But before we register, we want to validate. So let's go ahead and do something that accounts for that. So here is the first part of our validation here that we need to take care of. So in order to validate, we need a method we need to create a method. Here, let me write it in our comment. We need to create a method. And what does this method do? It validates, right? So called validate user. This is going to be the name of our method. All right. So this method here is going to be the key to validating our user. And so let's assume we're gonna have this created in just a bit. Let's assume this works. Whatever this is, however it does, it validates. Like we saw the way that our other app validated. When we didn't have the right entry, it would tell us, right? So let's assume however this works, it works. It's a method that validates. So what I want to do with that assumption is say if our user validate, say, because how do we get our data from our form? Where would we see the data posted? On the request.form, exactly. Exactly. So we're gonna say if not, okay, we're gonna add a not in front of it to say if this is not true, if user dot validate underscore user, this is our method that we hadn't created yet. and then it takes in request.form. Okay. If this is a false, if this is returns as if this thing returns as true, actually, if this statement is saying if this is not coming in, if the validate user method is returning a false for the form data that we would have submitted, then I want you just to return and redirect back to our index route. Okay. And what this does is it redirects us so that we do not go on to the next page if our user is not validated. Okay. So we haven't created it yet, but what we know it's going to do is it's going to validate. It's going to check to see if our entries are correct. Without knowing how it works, all we want to do is say if it returns false, or if it returns that the user is not validated through this method, then I want you just to go back to this index and go back to index.html. Right? This is like Monopoly. Do not collect Go. Do not go past Go and do not collect $200. You may not go to the next page if you did not validate your user. Okay. So what does this do? It's calling user, right? So in order to call user, what do we need to import in order to have access to our user model, right? Because what did we create our user model? Here it is. So how do we access our user model through our imports?
From flex add dot models dot user models import import user.
All right, so now we have imported our class. And so with this class, we're able to access class methods, right? So now what we need in our user is a class method associated with user so that we can validate. All right. So then let's go ahead and look into our user model to see how we can do that. Okay, so let's look at our user model and start creating our validation method. This is going to be the method that allows us to decipher whether it's a valid entry or not in our entry. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that. And so now that we are at this step, I want us to recap. What is the difference between a static method and a class method? If we can recall, what's the difference between a static method and a class method? I mentioned it briefly at the beginning of this lecture. Please help me out here. What is the difference?
Static method will not change the instance.
A static method doesn't have exactly. It doesn't have access to the instance, and it doesn't have methods to the attributes. All right. So if it doesn't require class attributes in order to work, what does it require? What does it require? What do we need in order to validate the information? It's open-ended, but I know you guys can get this. I'll highlight it. We need that form data, right? It's that data that the user would have entered in here. So that gets passed in as request.form, right? And so we pass this into our validate user method. And when we create our method, then we can create a parameter to receive this. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say static method, right? So this is our new type of method here that we say doesn't need access to self or the class instance. And I'm going to call it validate user. And I'm going to call it user here. And this user is going to be equivalent to, it's going to receive the request.form data. It's going to receive our request.form data. All right, so now let's go ahead and start creating validation. And so let's look at our first example on our platform. Again, I'm not using this exactly because I have different entries, but let's see what it looks like. What we have for validation are if statements. If statement, if statement, if statement, if statement. This is what validation is. It's checking the length of the name or something. So our name can't be less than 3 characters long. If it is, then we change is valid to false. And as you can see, this is a variable that we assume is true at the beginning. It's like a light switch. If any of these triggers, we're going to switch it from is valid to true to false. Okay. So let's continue. Let's make our is valid equals true at the beginning of our method. Is valid equals true. All right. And so now we have our first if statement. We're going to say if, what do we want to check first? Let's check the first name. We want to say if first name, or if, let's say this, if the, let's check to see how our platform does it, because there's multiple ways I want to write this. Let's just take it from here. Right, simple and clean. Here we are. So we check if the length of not burger, but user, because user is what we're getting here. If user at first name, right? Because that's the, how do we get the request.form first name post, right? Because we're calling request.form now user. And in order to get request.form.first name, we say user at first name here. Okay, so this is accessing our first name in the request.form that we passed in, and we're saying if it's less than 3 characters, do 2 things: flash this message and also pass in is valid equals false. Now, before I do this stuff, I'm going to comment this out. I know that we can understand this so far. We have one variable that we called true at the very beginning before we validate anything. And if for some reason our if statement is triggered where first name is less than 3, we're going to set is valid to false. And if is valid is false, I'm going to make a print statement saying is valid is false. First name is not valid. Okay. And so we have our variable is changed to false. We have a print statement. I'm thinking here, what else do we need in order to make this fully work? We need to return this here at the end. We need to return this variable. So at the end of our validate user, we're going to go ahead and say return is valid. I want to know if this is true or false at the end of running this. All right. So now that I have one validation, I only want to check one at a time. I'm not going to build it for first name, last name, email, and do everything at once. I'm going to check and code bit by bit. Okay. It's a little bit of code and test, as we can say here at the dojo. All right. So we're not going to talk about Flash yet. We're just going to see if this triggers, if it says if this is valid. Okay. So what do we need to do in order to make this trigger? We need to enter into first name something that's less than 3 characters. Then we need to submit it. All right, James, I'm looking at your comment. Static method doesn't have access to, okay, no, that's not have to do with what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if this will hit. Okay, this is not what we need. Oh, okay, we need to restart our server because we broke it. We made so many additions here. So here we are, up and running, looking good. Refresh. Now, if we say AB, that's less than 3, right? That's just 2 characters. So I want to see that print message printed there so that I know my validation is working correctly. So register. All right, so we got a couple things going on here. All right, so the first thing, it wanted to create a user. So let's look at this line by line. If not, validate user request.form. So did it go through here? So object type user has no attribute, validate user. So it's looking for an attribute when I'm giving it a method call. Okay, no, not necessarily, but it's telling me object user has no attribute, validate user. Let's make sure that our app is properly connecting with each other here. So it's not getting access to validate user. Why is that? Let's see here. Did we properly connect our model? Flask.app models user model import user? Yes. But we don't have any imports in our user model.py. Do we need any? Let me double check here. Do we need to connect? I believe we're already connected through our controller.
I think we'll have to do MySQL connection in the models. Like import, hold on, because mine is working.
Okay, so maybe just a MySQL connection, but I wonder why, because I'm not sending anything to the database yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, we just have, it has to be from flaskapp.config.mysql connection, import connect to MySQL, and that's what
I wonder if
put in.
that's going to fix it. If it does, I'd be happily surprised. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so we're up and running. No, see, it's still not accessing our validate user. So maybe there's something in our typing here. So let's double check to make sure that we type this correctly. Validate user. How many times does this appear on my app? It appears on my model. Okay, so that is correctly spelled. And here I say, if not validate user, and then our method here also. So I think I'm actually missing something in my app.route.
In your user model, indent static method.
Indent it. Oh, okay, which is simple. Oh, really? That's it? Let's see here. Close call. If that's it, I'm gonna flip my desk. All right, here we are. All right, here we are. AB less than 3. There we go. Tyler saved us. Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. So let's always be aware of that. Okay. This method wasn't being accessed because there wasn't a proper indentation. Let's just show what I did there so we don't make this mistake on our own here. And we can see it on the recording in case we forget what this area is. Look at the way the static method is in relation to the class. It's on the same indentation level. And as we know, Python is very sensitive to indentation. So we have to have that proper indentation or we're going to get that same error. So let me go ahead and put in our entry that's not going to validate, and we're going to hit register. And it's going to tell us user has no attribute validate user. Even though I'm calling it, I'm accessing it correctly. Here I'm saying user.validate user. Because I didn't have that indentation, as you saw, Tyler pointed out, it's not going to read it. So let's go ahead and take everything here and make sure that it's within our class method. That's how we know it's within, if it's properly indented. So again, thank you, Tyler. Let's go ahead and see this now again. If you make another class, you wouldn't need to indent. Is it only for static method? It's for all the methods. So all the methods within the class that belong to the class need to be indented to show that they're within. Remember in JavaScript, the way that we would show it's within the function is if it's in with the, if it's in within the curly brackets. Why is that so hard to say? If it's within the curly brackets, then we knew it was within the function or even the class. But in this case, we need to see indentation in order to see that it's within. Does that make sense, Oriel? No? Okay. All right. I do want to emphasize this, so I'll go ahead and do my best to make this clear. When we, for example, were to write a function in JavaScript, so where is like a JavaScript, JS Fiddle? So when we wrote a function in JavaScript, let's see, is this JavaScript? Yeah, function. Example. The way that we would know that something is working within the function is if it's within these curly brackets. That's how we know that when we write something inside, like maybe another function, that it's within the first function. That's because it's wrapped within here. But it's different in Python. In Python, we don't have these curly brackets. So the way that we know that a function is within another function is by indentation, is by seeing that it's indented within. So instead of this, we'll say something, we would see it like this. Def. Let's make it def. And just by the fact that it's indented within, the fact that this is a little bit more on the inside, while this being above it, in Python, this is now showing that this is within this because it's indented as it's below. If it were not indented, if it were like this, then it's saying it's not within, it's on the same level. They're on the same parent level. But now this is saying this is a child because it's indented within. Making a little bit more sense, I hope.
It's yes. But my question was more targeted to the static method, as in like on line one of your example, it's just def, and then you declared a function, and then you can just click enter, then press and type in pass. But on the same line where you created that other function, you would just be able to type in def as well, and then enter, and then it would auto indent. Is it more that like at static just has to be like one frame indented
Within,
more than
yes,
any other thing?
because it's within this class user. So this static method belongs as if it were a function within a function to this class user. So as long as it's indented, it's showing that it's belonging to this class user. When I had it indented, when I had it like this, it's on the same level as this user. So it's not showing that this method belongs to this user because it's on the same status. Now we're saying, okay, if you're within, excuse me. Oh, no, that's not what I need. If you're within, by indenting now, you're showing this method belongs to this class user because it's directly under it and it's indented within.
That makes sense. Thanks for explaining.
Okay, if you need more practice, we'll definitely get that in. Just drop by and we'll make sure we understand that. It's critical. Okay, so what did we just accomplish? When we got this working, we got our first validation. Even though we had the message just print on our terminal here, we had our first validation. So let's take a look at that again. All right, so I'm going to say it's less than 3 characters, register, and we get rerouted back to index, and then we have this message. Is valid is false, first name is not valid. So what we want then is this message to post here, right? Post error message here. Once we get it here, we're one step closer to having our validation complete. Okay? So we covered static methods, what they do. We've just finished our first if statement to check that the message was validated, right? It had to be a certain length. Now we are going to go ahead and flash to display the error message. So let's talk about Flash. Ed Sheeran. Yeah, Ed Sheeran, he has to put his full name, Edward Sheeran. It's just the way our so we can actually make this maybe one make it one character. But we want Ed to tell us his full first name. Yes, good catch, Ian. All right, so now let's go ahead and continue. Let's learn about what Flash is. And I am going to show us in the platform where it tells us that we need to import it. So let's import this at the top of our class of our model. Okay, so let's go ahead and import this into our model. Here I am. There we are. So now we have Flash imported. Great. Now that we have Flash, and it's part of Flask, by the way, now that we have our Flash imported from Flask, as you see here, we're going to go ahead and uncomment this out now. So let's go ahead and leave that there. And now I want to print my Flash message. Yeah. I want to print my Flash message. So now let's go ahead and test it again. AB. I think this should work just fine. Now let's take a look at our terminal. So now here we have our flash message function at flash. Let's see that again. Let's clear my terminal so we have a clear view. Okay, start up my server again. Here I am. And let's put that entry in, register. And there is my flash message. Okay, now that message carries something, and I need to see what that message carries. I need to pull out from the flash message that flash result. All right. And in order to do that, in order to see what flash message that we have, we need to access it in our Jinja. So let's go to our index.html. And let's talk about how we can pull in our flash messages in here. Okay. So let's expand this a little bit. So our flash message can be accessed in our HTML because our render template method in our where are we? Our render template method, or our redirect to our index, which has the render template, because render template comes from Flask as well, it's going to have those flash messages there available for us that we can pull. So if we go to our index.html, as I just was there, we can go ahead and use a Jinja statement to check for all the flash messages and to post the messages if it is there. Okay, so first we need to create an if statement. We need to create an if statement. So we have the shortcut for the if statements in Jinja. So I think it's JIF. And there is the template for an if statement. I need to check to see if the messages are even there. Okay, so if messages. And I need to, the way that I have the ability to check if the messages are there is by saying if messages, and this is going to check flash messages at all. In fact, what I can do is pull in, I think what I did here is I saved messages to a variable, and I think I need to edit something here real quick. Let me just double check something. And my mouse is whizzing out. Okay, hold on a second. All right, come on, mouse, work on me. There we go. All right. Yes, okay. So what I need to do is create a variable that holds the messages. So what I'm going to do is create that now. I'm going to say with messages, get flashed messages. All right, I am assigning this function called get flash messages to this variable messages. Okay, and this is checking, this is just a shorthand way to write if there are messages in get flash messages function. Okay, so establishing a variable and then going ahead to say this variable equals this function call. If this function call rings true, then we are going to then read our messages, right? So inside our if statement, we need a for loop to read every single message that would pop up. So far, we've only initiated one message, but we're going to have to create a list of different messages for each error. Okay, so we're going to need more than one message, as you can already tell. If they enter in the first name wrong and the last name wrong and the email and password and so forth, so on and so forth, we're going to need a list of those messages. So that's why we're going to have to create a for loop. So J4. Okay, so we're going to say for message in messages. And for each one, we're going to post in a p tag the message. And we also need an end with, right? Because we have an end beginning one here. So we'll go ahead and this one here closes this. This end if closes this one here. This end for closes this here. Okay. Now looking good. This here should display our Flash messages. Let's see if this works. Okay, so let's pull up our terminal. I want to see, I no longer want to print this. I'm going to want to just flash, just flash this here. And then tell me if it's valid this way. Okay, is my server up and running? Yes, it is. So let's go ahead and start this. I'm going to say AB and register. Okay, now I have 3 Flash messages. Why do I have 3? It's because I did this 3 times and it created a new message each time. All right, so we almost have this complete. So what we need also is to only display one message each time we get the error. So let's refresh this page. I'm going to say AB, register, and there we go. Now that we have a fresh refresh, we only get the message each time we register. Let's do it again. AB, same message. Name must be at least 3 characters. Now let's read the comments. That syntax if messages is it just text if messages exists? Yes. Is that Jinja thing or is it valid in Python too? So this is a Jinja statement here. What I can do, I can shorthand this a little bit so we can better understand this. I can say this way. I can grab this here and say if get Flash messages. And by the way, commenting a Jinja statement is really difficult. So it's better just to delete them. All right, so this is saying if there's some messages, let's see if I believe this should work just fine. Let's make sure my server is still up and running. Is it? Yes, here it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it. AB. Okay, I broke something there. Let's see. What is the output of get Flash messages? Hold on, before I answer that. Did I do this right? If get Flash messages. I think I went a little ahead of myself there trying to prove that it was the same thing because it broke when I didn't include this with here. So what this does is it assigns to a variable this here function call so that we can print each message. So keep this as a standard syntax for posting your Flash messages. All right. We can assign it to a variable, make that function call the value of the variable, and then say, if that rings true, then go ahead and loop through the messages, post that message, and then we have the closing for our for, if, and with statement. Okay, let's take a poll. How well did we see how I connected that validation message to be posted? If we need, we're going to be going over a couple more validation techniques. We're going to still be posting validation for the rest of our functions here. So we have first name, last name, email, password, confirm password. Okay, so now that we know what we're doing here, we can zip by a little faster. And let's check the time here. All right, we've been going on pretty long at this point, so let me see what I can show us within just a short bit of time that we have left. Let's go over our validation method here. So far, we're only checking first name, so let's go ahead and add for the rest of our form fields. So let's say our last name as well. Oops. Okay, so let's take this, add it for last name. If last name is less than 3, all right, go ahead and set that to false. Now let's check this. AB. Oh, and we need to change here specification. So first name, and then we'll switch this to last name. Okay, so AB register. Oh, so now it's telling me it must be 3 characters long, and now this must be at least 3 characters long. Okay, so first name. Okay. Now, there's another thing I can add in my if statement to make sure that it's getting a value. Okay, we can, in addition to check to see if it's less than 3 characters long, we can also say if it's empty, right? But for now, this will do. Now let's do it again for password. And so let's finish this out for email and password. Email. Password. Okay, so now if I click register, I have all 4. First name, last name, email, and password must be at least 3 characters long. All right, looking pretty good so far. Let's take a look at our checklist. So now we've covered using flash messages to display our errors. Now we haven't had a need to categorize our flash messages because we've only had one form so far. All right, so what we can do in order to show how our messages can be specific to the form that we're working on is create another form in here that basically allows for that differentiation. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the other form. Let's go into our index. And this form is going to be for logging in. So this is the second form we've created in our page. We'll say the action goes to logging in. So let's go ahead and think about what we need to do to create this. So 1 second here. Let me pull something up. So we'll say this action is going to be to our users, and we're going to log in through here. This is going to be a method post as well, because we're posting to the server the information to see if it has a valid login. Right, so in this form, I'm going to say, I'm going to put H1 here. I'm going to call it login so I know what it is. And I'm going to call this one here registration. Let's see that. Okay, so I have my login and registration. Let's make those H2s probably better. All right, and then so once I have my login, let's go ahead and put the form fields in for that. So I'll have my label for email. We'll make a label for email, and then we'll put a input for email. It's going to be type text. And I'm going to say email equals, oh, no, sorry, name equals email. Here's my email. And then password, table for password, input, name equals password. Okay, and this also is going to have a submit button. That doesn't work. You got to type in button and then type in submit here. But I want this to be for login. So okay, there we are. All right. So now that we have our login, I want validations for our login as well. You can't have empty login forms when you try to log in. And whenever you have empty login forms, you want the validation to be posted specifically for the login and not for password. So what I'm going to need to do here is augment my with messages as well. And in here, I'm going to have to set a certain category filter. So we're going to call this category underscore filter. And we're going to make this for the registration. And we're going to do the same thing for login. So, oh, what am I doing here? I want to take this whole thing and let's put it within our form here. And then I'll make this for login. Okay. Now the way to make our Flash messages categorized by their type is by going into our model and setting the type of registration it is. So let me find here where I want to enter that. Where I want to enter that is right here within this parentheses. So I'm going to enter in the type because what this receives here is the message and then the category filter. So let's go ahead and give the message and then the category filter. So we're going to say this one is for registration. So let's go ahead and copy that in for each one here. All right. Let's see if our server is still up and running. It is. So when I type in AB here, I have my Flash messages posting at the top here. Let me see if I can get it to post below our title so that we know. Oops. What did I do here? Okay, where did I go? So here I have registration and I want it within my form. So let me take this here. I'm going to cut it, paste it below my title here. And so now my Flash messages for my registration are only going to post within my registration form. So if I say here, there's my Flash messages specific to my registration. And now I need some Flash messages that will only post to login once I submit that, as you see there. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some category filters and some validation for login. So what do I need? I need a route for users login that will validate, right? So let's go ahead and go to our route and let's create it. All right, so app.route, and we'll say users login. Oops. Users login methods equals post. And then we'll say, all right, so we're going to use our function def login. And then we are going to run our validation. We're going to do it the same way we did our validate. So we're going to say, if not validate user, but we're going to call it something else. We're going to call it validate login. We can make multiple static calls or static functions here, static methods. And I want to say def validate login. And take in the user, set is valid to true. And then we can take the length as well. We can say if length of email or password is this, then set these messages and set it to login and login. Okay, so now that we have our validation method for our login, let's go ahead and return this here. Say, if not validate user, instead we say validate login. And we forgot a comma. That's why we're getting that error there. Okay. So now we should be able to trigger our validation for login. It's going to go to this method. It's going to check if the user email is less than 3. And then it's going to flash and say email must be so many characters long. And it's specific to login. So let's check that our index.html has that. Category filter login, and let's test it. Okay. All right, let's restart this. Okay, I'm going to type in a short email. And now we have our validation related to our login, specific to our login here. It's just not below my H2. So I can just change that right now. Let me move this up. Let's add another invalid entry, and there we are. So now we have our validation messages for login specific to login, and it's not showing up for registration. We have two different validation methods, as we can see here in our user model. Okay. Now I think is a good time to take a poll, look at the time, and see how we're doing. How well do we see that we made specific validation for each form, and how those flash messages popped up for each specific form entry? We've categorized now our flash messages. So if we have two forms now on the same page for our login and registration, our flash messages will be now specific. All right, at this point of the day, if I introduce these topics, we're going to be here another hour. So I'm going to include this in the afternoon lecture. Okay, and now is a good time to break and re-meet for the afternoon. All right. So validation takes a little bit of learning curve to get into it, but once you are in it, sorry, I sent another poll that was unnecessary. But once you have done it once, what you can do, as you saw that I did here, is copy paste this, right? If all of our registration and login pages work the same, then this methodology that I've used is going to be the same for each app. So as long as we can understand how it works, we can also know then how to fix it if it breaks, and we can incorporate it into our code without straight up copying code without knowing what it does. Okay. And I don't want you guys to copy my code word for word, letter by letter, so that I can't differentiate, like what Kyle said, between my code and yours. Okay. Sometimes it is similar and you can't avoid it, but I want to see that you went in and did the work of understanding it by typing this all out yourself. Okay. Okay, and I see here a question by James. Is the BELT exam still going to be available to take on Wednesday if lectures are about a day behind? So we are still taking the exam on Wednesday. We should still be caught up by then. We will have our full stack app done by tomorrow. By the afternoon lecture, we should be squared away, because what our app does essentially is a combination of what I am building today, a user login and registration. And once we are able to get past the registration and get to a point where we're seeing, we're able to enter our app through registering, what we want to see is the same app that we saw Kyle build last Friday, right? That app that Kyle built on Friday, which is able to do CRUD functionality for movies and actors, or sightings of aliens or something, So you just want to be able to have a one-to-many data and post that data and be able to edit, create it, update it, delete it as a user. Okay, so you need to be able to do that as a user. So you'll need to go in and create a user in order to get to that page where you're creating that CRUD functionality. Once you're there, you pretty much have the app. Okay, So we're almost there. We still have some code to go and login, use registration and login. And again, if by Tuesday, even though you have finished the code or the app that you would needed to be able to take the exam on Wednesday, we can still take the exam up until the 4th week. The very last day is the Wednesday of week 4. After that, you can't take any more exam attempts. You have 3 exam attempts from the time of Wednesday this week until Wednesday next week. So it's still a fair amount of time to work. You do want to be done as soon as possible, so you have that week to work on your own project. That'll be a lot of fun. But if you don't, the object of this is to pass the exam. So you want to get past the Python exam. Okay, so now let's go ahead and close this lecture because I don't want to keep you guys too long. I want you guys to put some stuff into practice. But when we come back, we're going to be going over how to validate a user email using what's called regex. Then we're going to be learning how to take the passwords that we would have sent in and make them secure and secret so that people can't guess the passwords for our users. Okay, so we're going to hash that up and send that to our database. We're going to learn about the tools that we need there. Once we have that, then we're able to create users in our database, right? Then we can just start populating our tables with users. Once we're able to populate our tables with users, that means we would have properly validated the entries, checked that the emails are correct emails, and checked that the passwords are properly hashed. And we'll explain what that means. Okay, so we are still moving full speed ahead, but we're tackling each detail bit by bit so that we know what we're doing here. Okay, so we've learned about static methods, we learned about validation, we learned how to make it specific, and we're going to continue on with this in the afternoon. Okay, so let's go ahead and break out into groups now and get straight to working so we can be ready for this afternoon. Let me go over the calendar real quick so that we know what we're up to. The end of day assignment for today is to create your own login and registration page. So whatever we're doing today is really going to help you with the assignment. There's no reason to be falling behind. Okay, if we had done everything up to last weekend and we are still caught up today with creating this end of day assignment, we are on a good pace. Okay, tomorrow's end of day assignment is to be creating an app that's a lot like our exam. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and close out and get to working. I'm going to pause or end the recording now.